Hey all, this is the first assignment for Politics 309 on the international community's obligation and response to Aleppo. So for my video log, I'll be taking a look at and comparing the recent history of responsibility to protect, investigating Libya and Kenya, and therefore allowing a comparison to the situation in Aleppo. So firstly, I'd like to identify the reasoning for R2P being created. In the past century, nations like Cambodia with its Khmer Rouge regime, Botswana with ethnic cleansing, and Iraq in the 80s with chemical weapons have all been internally terrorised by either their governments or other groups who have gained control, have caused huge human rights atrocities in their own nations. Perhaps one of the most significant events has been the Rwandan genocide, to add to that, when more than 800,000 Rwandans were brutally murdered by their own government. It was up to the rebels to end this conflict. There was no international intervention. And so to this day, the world still asks, why was there no international intervention? And it's events such as these, as well as the outcry and critique of the international community, that have given rise to the responsibility to protect. So firstly, I'd like to look at Kenya as one of the first nations to have R2P to be implemented. Kenya fell to violence in 2007 after elections, the government killing over 1,000 people and displacing 600,000 people, driving them from their homes. The international community responded relatively quickly, and within a few months, negotiations took place. There was intervention mostly through political means, and peacekeepers, this sort of things, and tribunals, and violence was pretty quickly nullified, and that allowed for Kenya to become relatively stable, stopping the violence. So Kenya was pretty much the first example of where R2P had been used successfully. So the second nation I'd like to identify in regards to R2P is Libya. Libya is probably the most famous use of R2P, or the most notable anyway. There's been a lot of controversy over how it was implemented and why it was implemented. So I just want to give a brief history of that. Gaddafi, obviously being the leader of all the violence that was happening in Libya, it was quite easy initially for intervention to occur, and the direct threat out in the desert was easily nullified, as they were easily seen by airstrikes taken out. And it was seen to be quite successful early on. However, it quickly became a far more complex matter as international intervention moved into the cities. They quickly weren't able to differentiate between civilians and, I suppose, the enemies, and therefore a lot of civilian casualties occurred. And since intervention occurred, it's been estimated that between 2,000 and 30,000 deaths happened, and that's either from Gaddafi militants or from civilians. So it's interesting to note between 2,000 to 30,000. So it just highlights how little information is known about what has occurred there, and really shows that no one really knows how it was implemented and if protection did occur. It's also interesting to note that implementation only occurred once oil reserves were divvied up and negotiations had been finalised between other nations, notably America, and also the intervention occurred on misinformation. So continuing on now to Aleppo, it's really hard to compare R2P with Aleppo, Kenya and Libya, mostly because R2P hasn't really been implemented at all in Syria or in Aleppo. And so that's really interesting because it's had all the grounds to be implemented. However, for whatever reason, it hasn't been. So if we look at the reasons it hasn't been, it's probably because, or possibly because, of what happened in Libya, where there were a lot of civilian casualties and a lot more harm occurred than it possibly could have. And therefore, it could have been a far more risky intervention than most think. And therefore, it is justifiable that no one has really gone in and done what R2P asked for people to do. On the other hand, maybe there's just no incentive for people to go in. There might be just too much to lose and no oil like Libya had. So in conclusion, I'd really like to highlight some key points from the vlog in terms of R2P. So clearly with the examples of Kenya and Libya and Syria, we can see that each circumstance is incredibly different and difficult in terms of the internal politics and the external politics surrounding on who can intervene and why they would intervene and what's going to occur if they do intervene. It's all really up in the air and there's no black and white. Regardless, I think that if R2P is implemented, there's going to be criticisms and you can never really win. Going into Libya, they've come out and it could be seen as a success or not really a success. Not going into Rwanda, even though R2P wasn't around then, but not going into Rwanda has obviously been seen as a grave, not as very unsuccessful. So thanks for watching. I hope it's been informative. Thank you.